My father has never once looked at me the way he looks at my brother. I noticed it when I was 7. We were at a 4th of July cookout at my uncle's place in Bethesda, the kind with plastic folding tables and somebody's dad burning hot dogs on a rusted grill. And my brother had just thrown a spiral, so clean it made 3 grown men stop their conversations. My father watched that ball arc through the humid summer air, and I saw his whole face change. Like something lit up behind his eyes that had been dark for a long time. I was standing 6 feet away holding a paper plate with mustard on my thumb. He didn't look at me once. My name is Sloan. Wait, no. My name is Nora. No. My name is Vera. And my father is Admiral Lawrence Holt, United States Navy, 32 years of service, 2 combat tours, a chest full of ribbons that he arranges in precise order every morning, like a man who believes the universe owes him its attention. My brother's name is Daniel. He went to Georgetown on the lacrosse scholarship, flunked out after 3 semesters, and has since managed a mid-size car dealership in Fairfax, Virginia, where he is, by his own description, crushing it. My father talks about Daniel's dealership at dinner parties the way other men talk about their kids' med school acceptances. I have a master's degree from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, a certification in advanced explosive ordnance disposal that less than 40 people in the entire country hold, and a call sign that I am not allowed to discuss in unclassified settings. My father has never asked what my call sign is. The first time I tried to tell him about my work, really tell him, not the sanitized version I gave my mother over Sunday phone calls, I was 24 and home for Christmas. We were in his study after dinner, the room that smelled like old paper and the specific brand of pipe tobacco he'd switched to after his doctor told him to quit cigarettes. I sat across from his desk, which was the thing people did in my family. You sat across from his desk, not beside him, across from him. I told him I had been selected for an advanced EOD program, that it was competitive, that fewer than 3% of applicants made it through the screening process. He nodded. Slowly, the way people nod when they are thinking about something else entirely. Then he asked if I was seeing anyone. I was not seeing anyone. I was spending 60-hour weeks learning how to disarm weapons that could level a city block, but I was not seeing anyone, and that was the part of my life he wanted to update his files on. I drove back to base that night instead of staying over. I told my mother I had an early morning. She said she understood, and she held my face in her hands the way she always did when she knew something was wrong and had decided not to name it. My mother is a woman who has spent 30 years not naming things. I don't say that to be cruel. She's the most competent person I have ever met in a private capacity. She managed every household move, every school transfer, every ER visit across 4 duty stations in 12 years, all while my father was deployed or working or simply absent in the physical sense, while also being absent in every other sense. She is fiercely intelligent and quietly exhausted, and she loves my father in the particular way some women love men who take up all the oxygen in a room, completely, and at significant cost to themselves. I love my mother. I do not always agree with the choices she has made. I have made peace with the difference. I joined the Navy at 22, which my father found bewildering. Not because I was a woman joining the military, he respected that in the abstract, but because I had not consulted him. I had not brought the idea to his desk and sat across from it and waited for his judgment. I had gone to a recruiter in San Diego, taken the ASVAB, scored in the 97th percentile, and shipped to boot camp in Great Lakes while he was on a speaking tour for a veterans nonprofit. When he found out, he called my mother instead of me. When she told me he was proud, I said, "Did he say that? Those words?" She paused for just a half-second too long. "He said it shows initiative," she said. I said, "Okay. EOD is not a glamorous job. People think it is because of movies. The guy in the big suit, the ticking clock, the wire you have to cut in the last 3 seconds. The reality is that it is 90% patience and 10% the kind of focused calm that doesn't come naturally to most people and has to be trained into your nervous system over years. You learn to slow your heart rate. You learn to see a device not as a threat, but as a problem with a solution. And your job is to find the solution before the problem finds you." I was good at it. Exceptionally good at it, which is a thing I can say plainly now, even if it took me a long time to be able to say it without feeling like I was bragging, like I was taking up space I hadn't earned. My first deployment was to the Horn of Africa. I cannot tell you much about what I did there. I can tell you that I came back with a commendation that my commanding officer said he had written only twice in his career, and that I framed the letter and put it in a storage box under my rack and did not show it to my parents. My second deployment, I worked under a unit I am not authorized to name. I can tell you there were 6 of us, that we were tasked with things that do not appear in press releases, and that my call sign was assigned to me by the team and not by me, which is the only way a call sign means anything. The call sign is Cipher. I came home from my second deployment in October. By December, my father had organized a family holiday dinner at a restaurant in Georgetown. The kind of place with white tablecloths and a sommelier and a prix-fixe menu that costs $200 a head, which I know because I looked it up afterward. Because that is the kind of thing I do now. I look things up afterward. I try to understand the full picture of what happened to me in a given room. The dinner was technically a celebration of my father's retirement. 32 years. He was stepping down in the spring. There would be a ceremony at the Pentagon with the Chief of Naval Operations in attendance, and my father wanted a family dinner beforehand to mark the moment privately. Private, in my family, means with 23 people. The restaurant had a private dining room in the back, with dark wood paneling and framed naval lithographs on the walls. I arrived on time, which in my family means I arrived slightly late because my father keeps his watch 6 minutes fast and considers punctuality a moral virtue calibrated to his personal time zone. My mother waved at me from across the room. My brother clapped me on the shoulder and said I looked skinny. His wife asked if I was still doing that bomb thing. I said yes, I was still doing that bomb thing. My father was holding court at the far end of the table. He looked the way he always looks in rooms like this. Large, certain, attended to. There were 4 of his former colleagues present. Men I had known since childhood by their rank rather than their names. Men who had eaten Thanksgiving dinner at our house in Norfolk and taken hunting trips of my father in the Shenandoah Valley. Captain Whitmore, who had a white mustache and strong opinions about bourbon. Rear Admiral Peterson, who laughed at everything. A 2-star named Gaines, who I had met twice, and who both times had introduced himself to me as if we had never met before. And there was one man I didn't recognize. Tall, early 50s, with the particular kind of stillness that I have learned over the years to read as operational rather than temperamental. He wasn't wearing a uniform. None of them were. It was a civilian dinner. But he wore his posture the way military men wear theirs, like its load-bearing structure. My father introduced him as a colleague. He did not say colleague of what. The man's name was Broderick. He shook my hand, and his grip was measured, and he said it was nice to meet me. And then he looked at me for just a beat longer than a casual handshake warrants, and I filed that away. Dinner was mostly unremarkable. My brother told the story about the time he landed a 70-inch striped base off the coast of the Outer Banks. My father corrected minor details of the story. Captain Whitmore asked me what it was like being a woman in the Navy, and I said it was fine, which is what I always say, which is not a lie, but is also not the full truth, and the question moved on the way those questions always do, satisfied with the shortest possible answer. At some point, my father was telling a story about a mine-clearing operation he'd overseen in the Persian Gulf in 2003. It was a story I had heard before. He had also overseen it from a ship, coordinating from the command deck, which is where admirals oversee things, which is an important and necessary function. But it is not the same as being in the water with the device. I know this because I have been in the water with the device. I did not say this at dinner. I cut my halibut and listened and refilled my water glass. Then Rear Admiral Peterson, who laughed at everything, made a joke about the Navy needing more young women who were willing to push paper, and he looked at me when he said it, and several people at the table smiled. I smiled too. It is the smile I have been perfecting since I was 7 years old at a 4th of July cookout in Bethesda. My father did not correct him. That is the part that stayed with me. Not the joke, which was thoughtless but not malicious. Not the men who laughed. My father, who knew exactly what I did or should have known if he had ever paid enough attention to find out, looked at his plate and said nothing. After dinner, when the plates were cleared and someone had ordered a second bottle of wine, my father stood and gave a small speech. He talked about service, about legacy, about the men in the room who had shaped him and the institution that had defined him. He talked about Daniel, who had learned discipline from watching a father who never cut corners. He looked at my brother when he said this, and my brother looked proud and slightly drunk. He did not mention me. I want to be precise about this because I think precision matters. He did not forget to mention me. My father does not forget things. He is a man who remembers the tailoring specifications of every dress uniform he has owned since 1991. He chose not to mention me. I don't know exactly why, whether it was the old reflexive habit of not knowing how to talk about me, or something more pointed. Something about not wanting to acknowledge a version of service that had exceeded his own in ways he couldn't comfortably categorize. I don't know. I have stopped trying to fully understand the architecture my father's silence is. What I know is that I sat at that table and felt something I had felt many times before and had never quite found the right name for. It is not exactly hurt. It is older than hurt. It is the thing that lives underneath hurt. The thing that has been there so long it has become structural, load-bearing in its own way. Broderick, the man I didn't recognize, was watching me from across the table. After the speeches, after the cake, and the decaf and the long goodbye process that my family conducts the way military families conduct retreats, with ceremony and specific order of precedence, I was putting on my coat in the foyer when Broderick appeared beside me. He said, "Commander Holt." Not Miss Holt, not Vera, Commander. I said, "I don't believe we've been formally introduced." He said he knew who I was. He said he had wanted to meet me for some time. He said that he was sorry to do this at a family dinner. He was not with a unit or an agency he could name here, but that he had some questions he wanted to ask, if I was open to a conversation. I said, "What kind of conversation?" He said, "The kind where I need someone with your particular background for a problem we've been unable to solve through conventional means." I was quiet for a moment. The restaurant noise moved around us. Through the window of the private dining room, I could see my father holding a glass of port and receiving the affectionate attention of the men who had spent their careers deferring to him. I looked back at Broderick. I said, "What's the clearance level for this conversation?" He named it. "I will not name it here." I said, "My father doesn't have that clearance." Broderick said, "No, he doesn't." There was a silence that was not quite a pause. It was the kind of silence that reorganizes things. I said, "When do we start?" The project took 4 months. I cannot describe the specifics. I can tell you that it involved an IED variant we had not encountered before, a device designed with enough sophistication to suggest state-level involvement, and that the team working on it had hit a wall. I can tell you that the particular problem they needed solved sat at the intersection of materials chemistry and tactical pattern recognition, which is an unusual combination, which is why Broderick had been looking for someone with an unusual profile. I solved it in 11 days. Not alone. There were 3 of us working the primary analysis, but the critical insight came from me, from a methodology I had developed during my second deployment that I had written up in a classified technical report that had apparently been read by someone who had passed it to someone who had passed it to Broderick. My call sign appears in the operations summary, Cipher. The operations summary exists in a system my father cannot access. I thought about that a lot during those 4 months. Not bitterly, or at least I tried not to. I thought about it the way I think about most things now, as information, as data about the shape of the world. My father retired in April. The ceremony was at the Pentagon, in a large room with flags and tiered seating, and the kind of acoustics that make every voice sound authoritative. The CNO attended. There were 2 senators. My mother wore a blue dress and held her hands folded in her lap the whole time, very still, the way she is still when she is working hard to feel something without letting it spill. I was in the 3rd row. I wore my dress uniform, which I do not wear often, and my ribbons, which are more numerous than most people in that room would have expected, and my EOD badge, which is a thing that people who know what it means notice immediately. Rear Admiral Peterson noticed. He did a small double take when he passed my row. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the badges, and then looked at my face, and then kept walking, which I took as a form of revision. After the ceremony, there was a reception in an adjoining room. There were small sandwiches on silver trays and sparkling water, and the kind of controlled social warmth that military receptions produce, people being gracious in a structured way. My father was across the room, surrounded. He always is. It is his natural habitat, the center of a semicircle of attention, and I have never resented him for being good at it. I resent other things. Not that. Broderick was there. I hadn't expected him. He found me near the windows, holding a glass of water. I didn't particularly want. He said, "I wanted you to know that the technical report has been formally classified at the highest level. Your name is on it." I said, "Which name?" He said, "Both. Your given name and your call sign. That's unusual. It was done intentionally." I said I understood. I did understand, though understanding something and feeling it settle into your chest are different processes that happen on different timelines. At some point during the reception, my father found his way to where I was standing. He had done the rounds, worked the room the way he always does, and now he was here, and for a moment it was just the two of us in a pocket of relative quiet while the event moved around us. He looked at my ribbons, he looked at my badges, he read them the way an admiral reads them, which is to say, he read them accurately, and I watched his face as he did, and I saw the moment that he realized the full picture of what was displayed there. His expression didn't collapse. He is not a man whose expressions collapse, but something moved through it, something reorganized. He said, "I didn't know about the second deployment." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have asked." It is the closest thing to an apology I have ever heard from him. It was also, as apologies go, a minimally adequate 1-4 words that acknowledged a failure of attention without quite taking ownership of the failure. I had waited for something like those 4 words for the better part of a decade, and when they arrived, they were smaller than I had imagined they would be. Most things are. I said, "Yes, you should have." He nodded. He looked at his glass. Then he looked at me again in a way that reminded me painfully and precisely of the way he had watched my brother throw that football when I was 7, like he was seeing something for the first time that had been there all along. He said, "Cipher." He said it quietly. He had connected something, gone looking in his memory for what he knew about that call sign, about what Cipher had done and where and in what capacity, and he had found it. I could see him finding it. I didn't confirm it. I didn't deny it. I held his gaze for a long moment. Then I said, "Thank you for your service, Admiral." I set my glass down on a nearby tray and I walked across the room to my mother, who was talking to one of the senator's aides about the school system in Arlington, and I put my arm around her shoulders and she leaned into me slightly. Just slightly, the way she does when she's been holding herself upright for a long time and something solid comes within reach. I held her there and I thought about what it costs to prove yourself to someone who is never going to look for you on their own. I thought about the little girl who stood 6 feet away with mustard on her thumb, watching a football arc through the summer air, waiting to be seen. I thought, she deserved better. Then I thought, she got it anyway. That's the thing nobody tells you about building a life outside the one that was designed for you. It is harder. It is lonelier. You do not get the running head start of someone's belief in you. You build the evidence first, and then you build the belief. And by the time the people who doubted you finally understand what they missed, you no longer need them to understand it. You already know. I am Commander Vera Holt. My call sign is Cipher. I have done things in service of this country that my father will never have the clearance to fully know. And I have finally stopped waiting for him to be the one who tells me that is enough. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the reception at the Pentagon, not the look on my father's face when he said Cipher out loud and understood what it meant. The moment I keep returning to is earlier than all of that. A folding table in Bethesda, a paper plate mustard on my thumb, and a football arcing through summer air. I was 7 years old, and I already understood, on some wordless level, that I was going to have to build my own proof. I used to think that was unfair. For a long time, I was right. But here is what I've learned about the way things actually work. Not in stories, but in life. What you build without someone else's belief is yours in a way that nothing handed to you ever fully is. My father's approval, had he given it freely and early, would have been scaffolding. What I built instead was foundation. There's a difference, and the difference matters when the pressure comes, and the pressure always comes. My father is a man of genuine intelligence and genuine blindness, and those two things coexisted in him for 30 years, without him noticing the contradiction. He could read a tactical map at a glance and miss his own daughter entirely. That is not a moral failing in the dramatic sense. It is a failure of attention, which is quieter and more common, and in some ways harder to forgive, because there is no single moment to point to, no villain's choice, just a long accumulation of averted eyes. What I chose to do with that, and it was a choice even when it didn't feel like one, was to let the work speak the language he understood. Not to punish him, not to perform for him, but because the work itself was worth doing, and because I am, underneath everything, someone who finishes what she starts and does it right. That is not something my father taught me. That is something I taught myself. Through 11-day sprints on classified problems and 2 deployments and 1,000 mornings of showing up when nobody was watching and nobody would ever know. Interprety works that way. It compounds quietly, in the dark, without an audience, and then, one day, someone who has been paying attention, someone like Broderick, finds the technical report you wrote alone at 0200 and follows the thread back to you. You don't get to shortcut that process. You shouldn't want to. And the intelligence it takes to do this kind of work. I don't mean test scores or advanced degrees, though those matter. I mean the discipline of mind that lets you look at a problem clearly without panic, to understand it before you try to solve it, to sit with complexity instead of reaching for the nearest comfortable answer. That is something you grow slowly, through practice and failure and the willingness to be wrong and try again. My father could not give me that. Nobody could have given me that. What I can tell you is that the girl who stood at that cookout with mustard on her thumb grew into a woman who has done things she cannot fully describe in this room, and she did it without anyone's permission. She did it because she decided that the absence of someone else's belief was not the same thing as the absence of her own. That distinction saved me. I hope it finds you too, wherever you're building something in the dark,